Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third edition of Facebook Live. I hope everybody is safe and well, and your families are all safe at this time, and you've coping with being at home under the lockdown rules, etc., etc. So, and I wish you all well moving forward. Right, today we decided, or over the last two sessions that I've delivered, a lot of questions have come in regards to anhydride calcium sulfate type of screeds. So I'm going to sort of go over them today with our view at ARDEX on these type of screeds and so on. But what I'm going to ask is, and I know last week the questions were coming in thick and fast, and they're really, really good to have questions. But what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everybody today, is try and take the questions towards the end so I can cover some key points with anhydride screeds. Obviously, this is just a quick overview. And as you say, please come on one of our free anhydride seminars later in the I seem to have lost a bit of connection there. There we go. We're back on. Okay. So, anhydride screeds. What are they? Well, there's various types out there: gypsum, anhydride, alpha anhydride, calcium sulfates. All these different terms used for these screeds. The builders use them because they're very, very cost effective. They can do a lot of big areas or do big areas in a short amount of time. Some of these experienced teams are putting in anhydride screeds. They can do up to 1,500, maybe 2,000 meters at a time, whereas a traditional screed, a really good screeding team, they'd be lucky to do 300 meters a day, and that would be a push. So there's benefits. It's quicker to install, and obviously you reduce costs because of installation time, etc., etc. Anhydrides are used a lot as well with underfloor heating systems because it encapsulates the pipes really well, flows around the pipes and really encapsulates them. So it's used a lot with that. Anhydride, it is basically a form of a gypsum product. So just be wary of that. And as you say, just be wary that there are a few different types out there now, and there's more and more coming. And sometimes I think they get a little bit of a bad press in regards to drying, and hopefully later on I'll cover a little bit of some of the issues you get where they don't dry. And I think they get a little bit of a bad press for that. However, if they're installed properly in good conditions, they are very, very good screeds. Okay, so identifying a calcium sulfate. Okay, a lot of builders, tilers, flooring contractors, and whoever, they got various names from. Some call them gypsum screeds, some call them calcium sulfates, some call them plaster screeds, flowing screeds, and other people refer to them as the manufacturer's names, i.e., Givlon, Tarmac, Lafarge, or an Agelia. All different names for these type of screeds. They're usually light in colour, like an off-whitey creamy colour. But some manufacturers now have started putting pigments in, and Givlon have got one that is green in colour. Okay, so if you ever come across green one, please seek some advice, and we can talk you through that. Some of the surface of the screeds, they seem very chalky. So another way of identifying them is very chalky and some dusty on the top. That might be an indication it's a calcium sulfate. Maybe some latent has been left behind. Or some other clues could be there's been bigger areas, so there's not so many expansion joints in the area because they can do bigger areas with these. But one of the key things with identifying a calcium sulfate screed is one of the easiest way or good ways. Obviously, look at the colour. Look at the type of, look if it's a very, very closed surface. A normal sand and cement type of screed is a very sort of open, almost coursey type of surface. But an anhydride is very smooth and very closed surface, as you say, usually a bit lighter in colour, and so on. But one of the best ways to confirm, obviously, that the type of screed that is is speak to the builder. I always ask the builder, the homeowner, the project manager, whoever, what screed it was. And then you can refer to the manufacturer's data sheets. So it's always good practice to do that. And, you know, even sometimes I've been stood on sites wondering, is it an anhydrite? Isn't it an anhydrite? What's the best way of telling? And at the end of the day, it's always go back to the builder and try and get some clarification on the type of screed that was used. So I hope that sort of helped out a little bit identifying them. Just going through my notes here. Other things to look out for, and again, I think it was in the first session I did a couple of weeks ago, was lignite. Lignite is basically it's like a coal type of substance, a brown coal, or naturally compressed peat. Lignite is found in sand, so wherever they're getting the sand from in these quarries, every now and again they hit a patch of lignite in the sand, and that ends up going into the mix. And what a lot of floor layers come across, a lot of people come across with lignite on site, if they sand the surface of their calcium sulfate or anhydride screed, they start seeing these black bits and they think it's the aggregate. But actually, if they're quite large, well, I say large, a couple of millimeters or more than that, there's a chance it could be black lignite. Or like a browny lignite something. And the best way to sort of determine that is just get a little screwdriver or something like that and just pick one of these little holes out and just scrape it across the floor. And if it just gives you a black like charcoal effect, then that's an indication that that is lignite in the floor. The British Standard does say that they are allowed a little bit of contamination, lignite type of contamination in the screeds, but not a lot. So if you've got a heavily contaminated floor with lignite, maybe ask the question to the manufacturer, is this above the percentage that's allowed? Now, if you ever do come across a anhydride screed with lignite, obviously because it's a coal type of substance, if you can imagine, when the anhydride is pumped in, these little bits of lignite float to the surface, and then what can happen with them when they're in the surface of the floor is they can pop out. So you get these little holes where the lignite was popping out, and it can cause what we call pop outs underneath your final floor covering, and you get all these little indentations, pimples, bubbles, and so on. So you have to be very wary of that. So if you come across an anhydride with lignite, the only way of dealing with it is the floor needs to be dry, so that's below 75% RH, and then you need to use an epoxy primer, not an acrylic. So for our system, it would be our ARDEX R3E primer, which you'd sand blind, or if you're up against time, you could switch to the R5E, which is a faster version, a faster drying. So the R3E is a 6-hour cure, and the R5E is a 4-hour cure. And remember, that does need sand blinding. Just remember that the floor needs to be dry, and it's quite important if you've got lignite in them. So I hope that's lignite cured. But again, our service is there. Send us some pictures. Get in touch with our technical support managers. Request a site visit if need be, and we'll come and help confirm that might be lignite. So I'm just going to go into a little bit about anhydride itself. Like I say, they get a little bit of bad press, and sometimes it's it's not the manufacturers of these screeds that's at fault. And sometimes and you guys know it as probably as much as me, some of these anhydride screeds are installed sometimes when the conditions aren't quite right on sites. And it actually says in the manufacturers of anhydride data sheets that it should be the building should be a sealed envelope when these are being installed. So the roof should be on, the windows, or if the windows aren't in, the opening should be sealed up, and so on. And I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely been on sites and seen that hasn't been the case. And I've been on some big sites where that hasn't been the case. And then when it comes to our stage, you guys in the flooring industry, and even if we've got some tilers on board today, when it gets to your stage, everybody starts asking a question, why isn't this floor drying? Well, they need to look back, over the last 3 months, 6 months, whenever, when that product was first installed. I think the problems start occurring there, making sure the building envelope is right when the product's installed. And then we get on to obviously calcium sulfate. Commonly they use 33% more water than standard sand cement screeds. So again, that's got to evaporate out and come out. So again, if the conditions are wrong on site, then that moisture is going to take longer to come out, and so on. So all these things have a knock-on effect. The other a good thing about anhydrides is they'll go a lot thinner than a traditional sand and cement screed, and it's very, very easy to achieve an SR2 a floor, and if there's a good installer doing it, that's good on the tooling and stuff like that, they sometimes can get an SR1 finish on it as well, which is really good, and it's not that difficult to do. And as I say, for whoever asked the question before, easy. Another way to help identify if it's a calcium sulfate, you can do larger areas without the need for expansion joints and stuff like that. Application, these will go down a lot thinner. So a traditional sand cement screed, you're looking at 50 mil. You can go a little bit thinner with a bonded screed. But even a floating screed with an anhydride, you can go from 35 in domestic, 40 in commercial, whereas a traditional screed, as a floating screed, it's a minimum of 65 mil for domestic and 75 mil for commercial areas. So anhydrides have got the advantage; they'll go a lot thinner. Again, that should aid the drying because they're not as thick. But again, the site conditions have got to be right. A lot of the times anhydride screeds are laid as floating screeds. They sometimes have underfloor heating pipes on the insulation. But a key thing, and you guys might come across it a lot, is you get your anhydride and it might have a bit of cracking in it. Well, sometimes the cause of that is the insulation that was used underneath the floating screed. The insulation may not have been sitting on the floor properly, and it's rocking or movement and so on. And if that insulation moves, it's a bit of a common sense really. The screed above it's going to move and probably snap and crack. So it's important that the guys installing it make sure that underfloor, the insulation and that is flat and not moving and not bending and not twisting, etc., etc. And it should always have a 1200 gauge polythene laid on the floor to protect the floor from damp. We don't want any rising damp getting at the anhydride or something, so there should always be a membrane in there and so on. So it's quite important that you do that. And then after the screeding, so before, they've got to make sure the conditions are right, etc., to install the product. But then after that, the building and area should be left sealed to prevent possible drafts or rain entering the building for at least 48 to 72 hours. And then once that 72 hours it has elapsed, they should then open the building up to allow air movement to encourage drying. In the interest of optimum drying performance, it should be made to prevent moisture ingress to the screed whilst maintaining good ventilation. So again, if you've got a look, and again, if we look at the drying times, as you say, adequate. So once it's been protected for 72 hours, the building really should be kept warm, well ventilated as possible. And they say, I've got here the 4 key factors that should be considering with drying is the room temperature. So again, evaluating the room temperature will assist the screed to dry through evaporation, relative humidity. It is important to provide good ventilation, dehumidifiers if required, to ensure a low RH is achieved, as high RH will obviously slow the performance of drying. The screed temperature, well again, if you've got underfloor heating in it, another advantage of using these type of screeds after 7 days. After 7 days, you can get your underfloor heating commissioned, get it up and running, and that will aid the drying. And the final one is moisture ingress. Anhydride screed should be protected from moisture ingress to prevent rehydration. And this happens a lot on site. They get good conditions and the anhydride starts drying, and then a lot of moisture comes in the air at night or something like that, and it rehydrates. It takes moisture back in, and so on. So it's about the environment, and again, it's not down to the anhydride manufacturers sometimes, it's down to the builders, and making sure these sites are kept at optimal condition, and the drying time will be achieved. And as I got there, under good drying conditions, warm, well-vented rooms, calcium sulfate anhydride screeds dries at 1 millimetre a day up to 40 mil thick. Then after that rate, it's a 0.5 millimetre a day. So traditionally, a 70 mil anhydride screed, it can take up to 100 days to dry out naturally. Okay, and that equation that's worked out where you've got a temperature of 23 degrees and an RH level of 55. So I think we'll all agree that's quite unrealistic on most site conditions and so on. So hopefully that sort of give you an idea of the drying. Assisted drying can be achieved by using a dehumidifier. So as early as 72 hours of the installation of the screed, then some manufacturers say that you can put a dehumidifier in there. But please, if you're going to use dehumidifiers in a building to help dry it out, please make sure it's got a proper source outlet for the water to go away. I've been involved in so many jobs where people have used dehumidifiers and the containers, the barrels, or whatever you want to call them, they've had to collect the water, have just been allowed to overflow and re-wet the floor. So if you're going to use dehumidifiers, make sure the moisture, the water can get out down drains or something like that. So if you come across to, so we're moving on now to floor preparation. The preparation anhydride screeds ready for floor coverings is split into floor areas: sanding or grinding, underfloor heating commissioning, drying and mush testing, and then priming, or in certain cases damp-proof membranes. So if we just look at sanding, a couple of key points there. Now, there's various types of screeds out there. There's the normal calcium sulfate screeds. They can certainly have a surface latence on the top. There's other ones out there that are now called low latence, which have additives to prevent latence from forming. But again, remember the term low latence. You know, there's almost a chance that there might be latence on the surface of that floor. And sometimes it's worth going back to the manufacturers of these screeds just to ask them the question: is it likely to have latence on or not? Because there are new ones coming out every day or every few months, and they're getting more and more saying there's no latence on the surface. So again, go back to the manufacturer and ask them to check. But if there is latent premise on the surface, then it will need removing. A good way to look at checking for that is do a bit of a scratch test. Get a bit of we actually carry proper scratch test kits on our test vehicles, but if you haven't got one of them, a good screwdriver, and if you go 3 lines one way and then sort of 3 lines sort of an angle, and just to see if it's sort of scraping up and forming a bit of powder as you do your scraping. That's an idea. That's an indication that there's sort of latent on the surface. But as a general rule in regards to removing the latents, now there's this, whose responsibility is it? Well, I can remember going back many years ago when I first come across these, it was always put down to the screed contractor. It's his responsibility, but I don't think really there was ever anything put into that saying that's definitely the case. But what we actually say is really the responsibility should really be on the screed contractor, because he's best placed to know when the screed is cured sufficiently to start completing this process. And always remember, the quicker that latent, if there is latent on the surface, is removed, it's going to aid the drying process, and that's clear that happens. So I've got a bit of a guide here that I've picked up from some of the anhydride manufacturers. So if they were to remove the latents after the first week of it going down, it's only a light sanding that's needed. If it's left to it for the second week, then it might be a coarser type of sanding that's required. But if they've left it on for the surface for 3 or 4 weeks or even longer, then you're going to be looking at sort of grinding, diamond grinding and stuff like that, because it's starting to sort of get a bit harder, the type of screed and stuff like that. But it's very, very important that this is removed. Now, unfortunately, at ARDEX, we do have to go to quite a few of these where there has been failures, and a lot of the failures have occurred because the latent has not been removed. And it's a lot of the cases of that is the poor old flooring contractor, like you or me. I was one, many years ago. We didn't know it was an anhydride, and we certainly didn't know that latents needed removing. So if you're not sure, give us a ring, send us some photos, get one of our guys out, and we'll help talk you through it. But that's a good little guide. So as you say, the sooner the latency is removed, the easier it is to get off. But the key thing is make sure it's been done. But always check with the manufacturer of the anhydride or whoever's it is. Is it one that needs sanding or is it one that doesn't? But if you come across a traditional one, then usually they do. Even a low latency will require some sort. But just remember this as well. Even though the manufacturer of one that says it doesn't need sanding, this product doesn't form latent, so it doesn't need sanding. Think about other things that you might get on the surface. I did touch on it last week. We do get plasterers that they do the walls, they charge us for doing the walls, and they do the floors for free. And there's all sorts of other building, other trade contamination. How many times, through the winter months have you been on muddy sites and stuff like that, and that contamination from outside is just traipsed in and out of the house, and it builds up on the top of these screeds. So they're always going to need some kind of mechanical prep anyway. Okay, so moisture testing. It's always important that a floor is moisture tested before you go putting down any type of floor covering, smoothing compound, damp-proof membrane or anything like that. So and that always comes down to the flooring contractor, floor finishes contractor. He should be the guy that carries out that test and then let people know what the reading should be. So the test of anhydrides can be done with a hydrometer. Box test, where you put the box down, leave it for 72 hours and take your reading. And obviously if it's below 75% RH, then it's classed as dry, and if it's above 75%, then it's classed as wet. So just bear that in mind. There are other ways to test. I know Tramex have got a meter that'll do a scan test. But again, just refer to, if you're using the scan method of the Tramex, just remember that isn't actually classified in British Standard, but it does give you a good indication. Another way of testing it can be a carbide bomb, or a CM tester as we call it, and again all our vans do carry carbide bombs. It's a quick and instant way of checking the moisture in the screed, but it's a good way of testing it, but it's an invasive test. We do have to dig a little hole in the screed, so we don't like doing carbide bomb tests if there's underfloor heating in the slab, so on. So we have got that equipment. So as you say, the best way to test them, or the way that's recognised in the British Standard, is a hydrometer box, and go from there. And then once you've got your readings, obviously deal with the floor, as per manufacturer's instructions, I suppose. So that's that. So, and our ARDEX systems for dealing with calcium sulfate. So I'll just go through this, and then I'm going to go back and try and catch up with quite a few of the questions. I'm not quite sure whether it's worked like this week or worked this way, but it's a different way of trying it. Please bear with me at the moment. So if you get a damp calcium sulfate, so it's above 75% RH. Well, our system for doing that is there's a criteria that has to be followed before we would sign off putting a DPM on it, because some manufacturers of these anhydrides don't like DPMs being put on the top. So you need to check with the manufacturer of the anhydride, look in the data sheet to see if epoxy DPM can be used. Some are fine with it, quite a lot of them are fine with it now, but some just a little bit wary on using it. So again, part of our criteria is check with the manufacturer to say they approve using an epoxy. There mustn't be any underfloor heating in the floor, okay, so completely no underfloor heating in it. The subfloor must contain a structural DPM. Well, they should always be putting one of them in anyway before they install the screed. The screed should be down for a minimum of 28 days, and it should reach a tensile strength of 1 Newton millimeter. But realistically, these screeds do become very hard, so after 28 days they should achieve that easily. And the moisture content, when you do your moisture test, should be below 90% RH. If it's above 90% RH, you're going to need to let it sit a little bit longer before you can DPM it. So just to clarify that, if you come across an anhydride screed that is wet, it's got to have no underfloor heating in it. The manufacturer's got to say that a DPM can be used. It's got to be 28 days old and meet the 1 Newton strength. It's got to be below 90%. And once you meet that criteria, we would say you could use our ARDEX DPM1C. Just something to remember, and I'm going to highlight this, we do not recommend bonding timber floors or DPM bonding. Timber flooring won't be bonded to the floor, so if you're going to use a DPM or anything like that, because a damp floor, we don't like timber going on them. Okay. So again, if it meets that criteria, and again, we've got a lovely little document on our website that tells you how to deal with anhydrides, and I advise you all to log on to the ARDEX website, go to services, go to downloads, and download yourself that little document that we got. It's a little A4 flyer, and it's good sometimes just to print a copy out and give it to customers. But that criteria there is classified there. So once you've done that and it meets that criteria, what we would say, obviously make sure it's mechanically repaired to remove any latent debris and so on. And then you can apply your ARDEX DPM1C or DPM1CR if you're in a bit of a hurry, using a B2 trowel because it has to go on at 350 microns. And then smooth it with ARDEX NA between 3 and 6 mil. They shouldn't need a lot of smoothing compounds to these anhydride screeds because they're usually pretty good and pretty flat. And then you've got 48, and as you say, you can get your NA down. You know, you've got up to 48 hours to get your NA down on the DPM1C. And then once the NA is cured, install your floor covering with an ARDEX adhesive. But what that actually gives you, you've used the ARDEX DPM1C, you've used the ARDEX NA, and you've used the an ARDEX adhesive. That then gives you a system, okay? And obviously you get the ARDEX backup for using this system. So that's how you deal with wet ones, anything above 75% up to 90%. If we've got one that's lower than 75% RH, then we class that as dry. So all we need to do with an anhydride then is prime it. Now it's very important with any calcium sulfate anhydride screed, if you're going to be putting a cement-based smoothing compound over the top, that it has a primer applied, because a gypsum-based material and a cement-based material will react against each other. You get what the formation of crystals. It's called ectronite, and it'll actually force one to debond from the other. So it's very important that you do apply a primer. So a dry calcium sulfate below 75% RH, we would recommend applying ARDEX P51. So option 1, sorry, we would recommend applying ARDEX P51 primer diluted 3:1 prior to applying the 11 compound. Now we differ from other manufacturers, and I'm sure I've told you enough over the last 3 weeks. When we've mixed your primer, diluted 3:1, tip it on the floor and apply it with a broom. I really want you to work it into that open texture that you've created of that anhydride screed. Really flood prime it. Let that go off, and then you can put ARDEX NA on the top. Option 2 for a dry one would be to use our epoxy R3E primer. So again, it's like the little bit like the DPM. You mix the two parts together, whisk it up, tip it on the floor. You apply this with a roller, like a paint roller, short pile paint roller. While it's still wet, you sand blind the surface with a very, very fine ARDEX fine aggregate, and then once that's cured, you can then put your ARDEX NA on the surface of that. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, and I know I was, why have we got two systems? Well, it's very clear and very simple, really. Some manufacturers that make these anhydride screeds, they say it needs to be an epoxy primer. A lot of these alpha hemihydrite ones, these low latent ones, they are very hard and dense, and they say it needs to be an epoxy primer. So if they say it needs to be an epoxy primer, then obviously it's the ARDEX R3E. But if the manufacturer is okay with an acrylic type of primer, then P51 dilute 3:1, but please make sure you apply it with a paint roller. Sorry, with a brush, not a paint roller. I'll clarify that. Make sure you apply it with a brush and not a paint roller, and really work it into the surface. Now, for anybody that hasn't seen the ARDEX R3 primer and the ARDEX P51 primer, I have done another Steva home video using our external smoothing compound, and I used the two types of primers on there. I applied the R3E and sand blinded it, so you can see how that's done, and I've also applied the P51 using a broom to see how flood priming helps as well. So they should be up on the social media today or tomorrow just to see that. So that's our systems for dealing with anhydrides. But just remember, it's all about systems. You can use DPM1C in certain scenarios, or you can use the primers in other scenarios. But I think you'll all agree with me, and I'm sure I've covered it enough. It's important that you can find out from the very beginning what that type of screed was. Okay, whether that's asking the manufacturer, asking the homeowner, getting more details, and then once you've got that manufacturer's data sheet, you can then refer to what type of preparation is required. One of the things that I've come across, we had one last week. One of my guys went to site and the builder, yeah, this one doesn't need sanding. We've paid extra for this one. So I said, that's fine. I've got one of my guys to ask for the data sheet for the products, which they gave us. We had the data sheet, quick read through it, and black and white, it's there. This product will need sanding before, to remove any contamination from the surface, etc., or latents. So again, it's quite important that we go through go through them systems. I hope that sort of helped a little bit with dealing with anhydrides, but please don't forget you're not on your own, and I would definitely prefer you, if you're going to come across an anhydride, especially if you've never dealt with one before, to give us boys at ARDEX a ring. Contact either your local area sales manager, one of your business development managers, or certainly one of my team, one of the technical support managers. Give us guys a ring, and we will try our best to talk you through it, come to site if need be. I really I get sort of I feel for contractors when they've been involved with anhydrides, pushed into laying on anhydrides, and it's gone wrong, and nobody ever wants to admit the responsibility then. Please get us involved in the beginning, and we'll give you as much guidance as we can on that. So let's have a quick go through the questions. I've got some coming through on my phone that's been sent to me. I'll just have a quick look through them. Again, easiest way to anhydride to identify an anhydride. Lee, I hope you're well. Lee Kirkham, I haven't caught up with you in a while. I hope you and your family are well. I like to see the pictures and that you're doing the jobs now and again. Hopefully, when all this is over, we can catch up. I hope I cleared up the identification, but again, sometimes you just have to go back and try and obtain the data sheet for that product. Ian, who is responsible for removing the latents? Well, I think I've sort of covered that as well. Ideally, the screed contractor, because he's best placed to know when it's ready to start being sanded and so on. Unfortunately, it just gets left. The builder won't. Well, builder will say, "Well, I don't need it doing," and it always ends up, unfortunately, on the poor old flooring contractor's lap. However, as a flooring contractor, you've got to make sure that that floor is you've removed any contamination from the surface. So I don't want to say it, but I'm probably going to have. It does usually end up in our court, as a pour-out flooring contractor, that you do have to do some sort of mechanical prep. But again, when the builder asks, well, I've paid and this floor isn't dry, well, probably the reason it isn't dry is because the screeder, whoever, didn't remove that latent in the first place. So everything like this has a knock-on effect, and it's again. These builders, these people that are buying these type of products, and they are very, very good materials, these anhydride calcium sulfate screeds. They just need a little bit more education on removing the latents, making sure the building is ready to receive these type of screeds and so on. I'll keep trying to go through some of the questions. Somebody says, what DPM is used on anhydrides if an underfloor heating is present? Unfortunately, we haven't got one at the moment. We have looked at systems, but if I have to be totally honest, one of the major manufacturers of anhydrides, or the raw materials for anhydrides, it's them that say really you shouldn't be DPMing them, because you should be able to use the underfloor heating to dry it out. So we've sort of followed that stance and stand by that. So yeah, at the moment, unfortunately, we haven't got one for that. Somebody's asked where commissioning underfloor heating before applying for it is not possible. What solution? There isn't one. You should never lay on an anhydride floor if the underfloor heating hasn't been commissioned. There are various ways now of bringing in temporary connections to do that. But please, never ever lay on any type of floor covering that the underfloor heating hasn't been commissioned. Okay, never ever, and don't let anybody push you into doing that. And if you need guidance on that, it's in the standards, or again, give our technical department a ring, and we might be able to help you with that. Does a builder have an obligation to let the customer know they're using anhydride screed? Not really. They're just employed to do a job, and they'll just use, well, as far as I'm aware, and again, so on. So, however, I'm not sure. Was it Paul that asked that question, Paul Cook? I don't think that they're just employed to do a job and use the materials to get there, to get to that stage. But unfortunately, and I probably agree, and I see where you're coming from with that, is a lot of poor old customers at the end result, they end up with the problem. Yeah, the build is gone, and so on. This floor isn't drying. It's not ready for us to lay on. It then needs sanding, and they find all these things out after. But yeah. Is K301 any good? Tell me about your YouTube video. Yeah, please. The guy that's asked about K301, obviously, we wouldn't recommend putting it on an anhydride screed. It's an external concrete repair or concrete surfacer. So, just the video will be up on social media today, but have a look on the ARDEX YouTube channel, and it's there. I did see it last night. Unfortunately, I will apologise now. Yeah, I do go on a little bit when I do these videos. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But it gives you a good indication of the type of product. And I've done it on a garden path, and there was a little bit of slope on that path, which I held a little bit of water back in the product, which we can do, and hopefully you'll see it give me the refinish that I was requiring. Mike, comment, the only reason for anhydrides is for underfloor heating due to thermal property. Yeah, anhydride is used a lot for underfloor heating to encapsulate the pipes, but there are quite a lot of installations also that go in where there's no underfloor heating either. And obviously they do. They do tend to suffer further drying issues where there's no underfloor heating. But again, good practice is if they've got underfloor heating in the floor, as you say, as soon as 7 days, in line with the manufacturer's data sheet, then that underfloor heating can be switched on and start running, and that will aid the drying process. So again, get the latents removed off the surface if it's needed to be removed, and get that underfloor heating running, and them two things running together should help dry it out. Obviously, making sure your RH isn't too high in the room, etc. Hang on, I'm just catching up with some more. Somebody's asked, how can you tell if it's hard enough? Well, again, the scratch test is probably one of the better ways, to have a look at that. And if anybody wants to see a scratch test, I can do a little a video on that to people to see how the scratch test kit is used. Not a problem. Just drop us a message, and I can come up with a little video on that. What's the best product for filling in hairline cracks following the commissioning of underfloor heating? Currently at the moment, our crack repair system, we're still looking at it in regards to anhydrides. It's fine with concrete, sandstone, screeds, but we're just making sure it's compatible with that. So Wade, I'm going to get back to you on that one and the best way of filling them in. Okay. I'll just scroll further down. Yeah, I think, Mike, that's a good one. They're usually quite flat. I like some of the comments we're getting here. We've answered the one on removing latent. I think we've got through quite a few of them. Yeah, no, I think I've got through quite a few of them, guys. I hope you found that quite useful today. You know, don't forget we are here behind the scenes. You know, we are sort of still available even though we're working at home. And so on. So, you know, even if you're coming across these issues now, please give us a ring, and we can talk you through how to deal with them as far as we see it, and hopefully avoid any failures that can occur. And as you say, we're there to support you. So, you know, again, thanks for everybody tuning in again this week. I hope you found that topic quite interesting. I'd like to, or I'm looking for suggestions for further topics over the next coming weeks. So just before you leave today, if you'd like to drop us a few comments in of other things that we can discuss that you might find quite interesting, please let us know. And I'll do my best to try and put a session together, or put something together for you for that. And then we can go from there. Last week I did offer to give some free t-shirts away. I seem to have quite a few t-shirts about at the moment, because we're not doing trade days and stuff like that, and we were asking you to send some pictures in of work and that you've done to ARDEX. We've had a few come in, but please keep them coming in, and we'll pick the best 15 pictures of using ARDEX products or something like that, and try and send you out some ARDEX t-shirts. And go from there. But just remember, if you're ever stuck for anything at the moment, you're struggling to get hold of any materials or anything, you know, just please give our guys a ring. You know, we might not be able to help every time, but you know, if it's something that we can help you out with, we will do our best to and support you, you know, at this time. So please get in touch, and we can go from there. And don't forget, as you say, you know, we're there. Facebook, you know, WhatsApp. You can send us videos from sites if you're having issues, and so on. So you know, okay. So I think I'm going to go and finish it there, and catch up with you all next week, guys. Again, please stay safe out there. Thank you for giving me your time today, tuning in, and again, like I say every week, thanks to everybody that's asked questions today. It really does help me follow up that, and you know, if I haven't answered your question today, please I'll try and log in and give you a message, a reply over the next couple of days, just to give you some guidance on that type of stuff. Okay, guys, you know, stay safe out there, keep in touch, and we'll catch up next Tuesday. Thanks, guys. Bye.